sounds dumb.
No, you've been sending me insults on Twitter, calling me, what was it, a Murdochian child murderer?
Roughly along that lines, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, really, when I don't actually send you personal abuse, Donnachadh, do you think that that's an appropriate thing to
I didn't
be
actually say, I didn't say that. I said that you're supporting that.
supporting child killing streets, I think is what you said.
That's correct, yeah. I didn't say you're a murderer,
No,
Christian. The
you said I support something that kills children.
Yeah, the fact is that low traffic neighborhoods reduce crashes by between 50 to 70%. And to advocate that we remove those, I think is really seriously dangerous to children's lives. And we need to protect those lives. That's where I'm coming from.
No, I understand where you're coming from. I just suppose that I mean, and we'll get on to personal behaviour, but seeing as you brought up the fact that we've been tweeting, I mean, Gail yesterday, called me a boring interviewer. Today she's called me an attack dog. I mean, do you think that perhaps, implying that I am in favour of streets that kill children, being told I'm a boring interviewer and an attack dog and get too personal, I mean, is that really the way to get people on side with the climate agenda, by being so personal towards those people who are simply critiquing your position?
I heard what she said yesterday. She said that your questions are boring. I didn't think they were. I think they're valid questions. I wouldn't have called them boring.
But do you think that in general, sometimes the tone from people like yourself, activists on this, are not that which are going to get people on side?
I agree with you that the personal insult, a direct personal insult, if calling you a murderer would be a terrible thing to do, and I haven't done that, and I agree that would be wrong. What I do come from is a tradition in Holland where there's this the initiative to protect the streets in Holland and kids in Holland was called Stop Murdering Kids. And that's the tradition we come from with the die-ins, because we're passionate about protecting lives. So yes, we are passionate. Sometimes the passion is expressed in colourful language, but you are right. We should actually try and avoid the actual personal insult.
So do you regret now saying that I advocate killing children, streets that kill children?
I didn't call you.
No, you say I advocate streets that kill children.
Yeah, I don't withdraw that, because I believe the campaign to destroy the LTN program is actually endangering kids' lives, and I don't regret that, Krista. That's where I stand.
Do you think it's going to get me more on board with it by you saying that to me?
Fair point, but it might actually generate some discussion and focus on what's really why I use that language is because I look in the face of the eyes of families who have lost loved ones, and I use the language of death because that's what we're talking about. It's actually killed kids on our streets, and that's why I use that language to try and get us aware that our current culture of cars, which we take as a privilege, take for granted, is actually quite a lethal culture. Tens of thousands of people dying from pollution from cars, tens of thousands of people dying from climate change, from pollution with cars, etc., etc. So I think it's important to use the language that describes the facts, and that's why I use that language.
So, okay, I disagree it gets people on side, but I can kind of see where you're coming from. Do you think that it's important then if one is an activist in such things, or indeed if someone is just going to claim to be passionate about trying to solve the climate change issue and passionate about being seeing that as something so important, that the very first instance is that it starts with personal day-to-day behaviour?
I think it has to be both. My personal approach is Gandhian. Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world, and that's what I try myself. This broadcast that I'm from my home is being powered by solar panel. I don't have a car. I've never owned a car. I'm a vegetarian. Every single stick of furniture in my home is secondhand. So that's where I come from personally. But I do think what's more important than personal action is actually we get the businesses, banks, and government to take action as well. And that's the most important thing, because whatever the hypocrisy of one activist will affect maybe 1 or 2 tons. The hypocrisy of Barclays banks, HSBC banks, Shell, and BP saying they're part of net zero when they're investing hundreds of billions of pounds in new fossil fuels is terrifying hypocrisy, because that damages the entire society, not just one person's emissions.
Okay, well, look, I want to explore that with you. We're going to go to the news headlines, but Donnachadh, I actually really want to explore the best way, because I think that's where we're not going to see eye to eye, is what is the best way to go about trying to solve those corporations and perhaps some of those countries as well, which aren't doing the right thing about this. So we'll come back to you in just a moment on Talk Radio. And I think that, Donnachadh, this gets to the root of the problem that people have. And I will get to what you're saying about BP and the like, but I think people get very, very angry when they see not only their freedoms being compromised when it comes to this from our politicians and from the things like low traffic neighbourhoods and from this message that comes from those sorts of restrictions, that it's got to start with us, it's got to start with personal responsibility. I've got to choose to walk or cycle rather than get into my car because of the pollution it will create. You must understand that when we're given that message, and then the people who are campaigning for that message aren't doing that themselves, not only does it completely undermine any credibility of that message, but it's also going to really just irritate people that their lives are being affected by not being able to get into parts of central London.
In an ideal world, everybody would have a carbon negative house like mine. Ideal world, every campaigner would not have kids and have to ferry them around. I agree with you. I've always approached it that way. When I started campaigning 32 years ago, when I saw the destruction in the Amazon, when I flew in those days, I didn't know about the carbon price of flying. And I saw the destruction of the Amazon, and I saw the death and genocide of the Yanomami people. My heart broke. I saw what was happening to them. I came back to Britain and I thought, what can I do about this terrible situation? And I thought, I'm a Gandhian. I thought the most important thing and first thing I would do is try and put my own life in order. And gradually over the last 13 years, I've reduced my carbon footprint to where my house is now carbon negative. I'm now free of fossil fuel gas. I've never owned a car. I cycle. I buy secondhand furniture.
But shouldn't those, and I get, and I so, say, we've fallen out before, Donnachadh, but I say fair play to you for doing that. But shouldn't those people, whom presumably you support at Extinction Rebellion, and Sadiq Khan, our mayor, has said that he's with them, shouldn't those people be doing that? Or is it possible to be a climate campaigner, to be desperately concerned about the environment, but still drive a diesel? Because that's the bit that I'm having a trouble with.
Well, we're all imperfect in many ways. 2/3 to 70% of British people believe we must take more action on climate, and yet 50% of us fly every year.
But not two-thirds of people aren't the ones closing roads though and campaigning.
No, but they're advocating action. So what I'm saying is yes, I as a person who understands the seriousness of the danger, I will accept support from you, from Gail, from the Prime Minister to try and take as much action as we can as fast as possible. And I hope as we go along this process, if each of those people are involved in the movement, as they get more and more into the movement, they understand and learn how to resolve their own carbon emissions, but most importantly, put pressure on the banks and the corporations and the government to help us and to help those who can't do it to do it faster. Because at the end of the day, whether I'm a hypocrite or whether Gail's a hypocrite, the fact is the planet's on fire. Unless we actually put the fire out, we're in serious trouble.
So will you today here condemn the founder of Extinction Rebellion for driving a polluting diesel?
I'm not going to condemn her, but what I will say is that I hope that out of this, that Gail will actually look at the options, such as an e-operated.
Why won't you condemn? You regularly condemn someone like me on Twitter for the privilege of using my car day to day, which is a far less polluting car than hers. Why won't you condemn someone who actually is demonstrably more of a hypocrite than someone like me? You're very, very trigger happy, Donnachadh, at condemning people who don't do the right thing. Well, this is someone not only not doing the right thing, but not doing the right thing whilst closing central London.
Well, to be frank with you, I don't know the particular situation around Gail. I know Gail uses trains to come up and down to London from where she lives in Stroud. I know she has converted her house to net zero carbon. So I know she does this thing. I know she's vegetarian. So I don't know how much she uses her car. Maybe it is only.
She uses it to ferry her children pretty
kids.
much daily, I understood, because they do sports.
Yeah, that's my own saying. So I don't know what, I don't have kids. So
well, perhaps, Donnachadh, the lesson to be learned from this is that you are more understanding to people's day-to-day struggles as well. You're maybe more understanding to mine, maybe more understanding to other people that you condemn on Twitter who might need to use their car now and then. And actually, doesn't this tie into, perhaps, if we're going to talk about condemnation, Extinction Rebellion targeting those particular companies you're talking about? It is absolute lunacy, surely.
Yeah. Well, look, we can talk for the next 10 minutes about hypocrisy, or we can actually talk what I thought was very constructive. I've actually said to you, ideally, I would have all campaigners have my lifestyle. But I'm saying we're not living in a perfect world, and we need to take action, and I need allies. We need allies, Christo, if we're going to leave a planet to the next generation. So let's talk about how do we tackle the hypocrisy of the banks and the and the oil corporations.
Absolutely, but certainly my suggestion isn't that you do so. But my suggestion is not that you do so by trying to inconvenience people going about their day-to-day lives. Why not blockade the headquarters? Why not blockade the Chinese embassy? Why not blockade some of the fossil fuel plants or refineries for some of these places? Why close central London, therefore inconveniencing people, when targeted action against the actual biggest polluters, the Chinese embassy? I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer that people would be protesting the Chinese embassy. And if you did that, I would be right behind you. I would be saying, absolutely, why are you inconveniencing the country and people in the country who emit 1% of emissions? Why don't you go and campaign at the embassy of the country that produces 28% of the emissions?
I think it's a valid point that the Chinese embassy is a good target. The Extinction Rebellion has staged protests at embassies such as the Brazilian embassy over the burning of the Amazon basin. It has staged protests at the headquarters of Barclays and HSBC. It has staged a blockade last week outside ExxonMobil's depot. It has staged protests at McDonald's headquarters because of the beef destruction. They have this week staged a protest.
So then why is this needed this week? Why are they closing central London rather than doing more of that?
They're not closing central London. They're closing 1 or 2 junctions, which is quite a modest disruption, to actually raise the alarm.
For weeks.
What Extinction Rebellion, I think whatever hypocrisy Gail and all the rest of us are guilty of, we owe her a huge debt for putting her freedom and her lifestyle at risk in leading us and trying to sound the alarm. Because if she hadn't, and those people weren't doing it on the streets today, you and I would not be talking about how do we resolve the fact that the planet's on fire, our future of our kids is at risk. The International Panel on Climate Change says unless we radically cut carbon emissions immediately, we are in serious trouble of actually.
But we have. You're inconveniencing. So what Extinction Rebellion are doing, Donnachadh, time is against us, but what they're doing is that they're taking people who might support them and might support the cause, and they're intimidating them and they're angering them, whereas those people would be far more supportive because you've won here in the UK. We're 1% of the world's emissions. We're going to be carbon neutral.
We haven't won. That's propaganda, Nick. Not by you, but it is propaganda.
Oh, is it not Murdochian? Sorry, go on.
The situation in the United Kingdom. Yes, we can agree on the point that we have to tackle Chinese emissions. One of the way we do that is at COP or through our colleagues in the European Union, is we impose a carbon tax on imported goods from China that takes account of the carbon they're emitting. That would help China to change. I agree with that. However, as regards the United Kingdom, we are a source of 15% of the global funding of international fossil fuels. We're the source of over 50% of global insurance for fossil fuels. We're a major headquarters for the marketing industries of fossil fuel industry. And so the United Kingdom is responsible for 4 to 5 times our emissions on our investments. So the one thing people could do today whether they support Extinction Rebellion or not, is move their bank accounts from like Barclays and HSBC, move it to Nationwide or Triodos, so that their money isn't funding fossil fuel expansion. That won't cost them a penny. They won't have to change their lifestyle. And if they did that this week, it'd be a fantastic.
And do you know what? If Extinction Rebellion and yourselves had given that kind of message from day one, rather than closing roads, I would be stood there with you. But you haven't got me while you're doing that sort of action, and there I think is the rub, and it's really difficult to advocate for personal responsibility when some of the members don't show that themselves, and I think we're actually in agreement with that. But listen, Donnachadh, good to talk to you.